Okay, so Barack Obama has decided to weigh in, which is just what America needed. We needed Barack Obama, who truly was an unbelievably polarizing figure. I know that the left has this vision that Barack Obama was a unifier. He was not. He ran as a unifier in 2008, and then he lied. It is one of the signal sins of our political history that Barack Obama, who was elected to unify America, no red America, no blue America, just Americans, no black Americans, no white Americans, just Americans. You remember it. I remember it because I am older than 5 moments old. And then he proceeded to polarize America by governing hard left and attributing the backlash to his far left governance to Americans' deep history of deep-seated racism. Well, yesterday, he was doing another obnoxious interview in which he says that we are at an inflection point with regard to political violence. I mean, I wonder how we got to this inflection point. How could we have done it? I mean, sure, it might have been that time that you effectively justified rioting in Ferguson. It could have been that. Or maybe it was that time, as we will get to, where you basically blamed the police for their own murders in Dallas. Maybe it could have been, but no, he was just too genteel. He was too genteel. Here's Barack Obama. Again, a man who considers himself holier than the Pope. Here we go.
We are certainly at an inflection point, not just around political violence, but there are a host of larger trends that we have to be concerned about. I think it is important for us at the outset to acknowledge that political violence is not new. It has happened at certain periods in our history.
Well, thank you for that. He continued by saying, he disagreed with Charlie Kirk on everything, but he wasn't empowering extreme. And then he blamed Trump. Of course. It's always about Trump. You see, he had nothing to do with the election of Donald Trump. I mean, sure, it was a direct backlash to Barack Obama, but it had nothing to do with him, obviously. He's just an observer, a passive observer in America's national history.
When it happens to some, but even if you think they're quote unquote on the other side of the argument, that's a threat to all of us. And we have to be clear and forthright in condemning it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a debate about the ideas that people who were victims of political violence were promoting. And so I've noticed that there's been some confusion, I think, around this lately. And frankly, coming from the White House and some of the other positions of authority that suggest, even before we had determined who the perpetrator of this evil act was, that somehow we're going to identify an enemy. We're going to suggest that somehow that enemy was at fault, and we are then going to use that as a rationale for trying to silence discussion around who we are as a country and what direction we should go.
So here's the thing. When Barack Obama does this, remember, this ties back into that FCC discussion we were having earlier. This right here is the narrative the left wants to retail. The narrative the left wants to retail is that Charlie Kirk's shooting is not about Charlie Kirk's shooting. And it's not about the left. It's not about the left's ties with political violence. It is not about the groups that support those political acts of violence. It is not about that. It's about the backlash to free speech. Right? So that is one of the reasons I'm objecting to muddying the waters with the kinds of stuff that we are saying with regard to the FCC. Just going to note that by way of explaining. Here's President Obama continuing.
Obviously, I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I was generally aware of some of his ideas. I think those ideas were wrong. But that doesn't negate the fact that what happened was a tragedy and that I mourn for him and his family. He's a young man with 2 small children and a wife who obviously, and a huge number of friends and supporters who cared about him. And So we have to extend grace to people during their period of mourning and shock. We can also, at the same time, say that I disagree with the idea that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake.
Okay, so he's extending grace to Charlie. Charlie gets shot, and he's not talking about the left-wing ideologue who shot him. He's not talking about the movement that created the impetus for violence. He is extending grace to Charlie. Don't worry, this is Captain Anti-Polarization. He's extending his grace to Charlie because Charlie got shot. Well, isn't that nice of him? Isn't that generous of him? What a self-centered. If you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. In today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document. They use a fake notary stamp. They pay a small fee with your county, and just like that, your home title is now transferred out of your name. Then they take out loans using your equity or even sell your property, and you won't even know that it's happened until you get a collection or a foreclosure notice. So when is the last time you actually checked on your home title? Well, if your answer is like most people, never, you probably should do that right now. And that's why I've partnered with Home Title Lock, so you can find out today if you're already a victim. A lot of people at the Daily Wire, including people on this team, trust Home Title Lock to protect what is likely one of their biggest assets. Again, much of your value, just as a person with assets, is in the chief asset you own, which is your home. Why would you make that vulnerable? Use my promo code Shapiro at HometitleLock.com. You'll get a free title history report and a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud does happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. Don't be a victim. Protect your equity today. Go to HometitleLock.com. Use promo code Shapiro. That's HometitleLock.com. Promo code Shapiro.
That's not me politicizing the issue. It's making an observation about who are we as a country. I can say that I disagree with the suggestion that my wife or Justice Jackson does not have adequate brain processing power. I can
Okay, pause it for a second. Okay, if you actually go back to what Charlie said about the quote-unquote brain processing power, I want to read you the direct quote. If we would have said 3 weeks ago that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson-Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Okay, so his argument there is if you say that someone required affirmative action, that is a tacit admission the person does not have the processing power that would have let them in just based purely on merit. That was Charlie's argument. But again, the idea that Obama is putting forth here is that Charlie was a racist. That is what he is trying to retail here.
We have to recognize that on both sides, undoubtedly, there are people who are extremists and who say things that are contrary to what I believe are America's core values. But I will say that those extreme views were not in my White House. I wasn't embracing them. I wasn't empowering them. I wasn't putting the weight of the United States government behind extremist views. And that is when we have the weight of the United States government behind extremist views, we've got a problem.
So it's Trump's fault because in his White House, they never emboldened extremist views, ever. I mean, that's something he never emboldened extremist views. So really, it's the people who embolden the extremist views. So eventually he does get to the permission structures for violence, but then he basically says it's coming from President Trump. I will note at this point that Barack Obama labeled his political opponents enemies effectively all the time. It happened all the time. He literally had a man helping to run his national security agency Ben Rhodes, a national security advisor, who was nicknamed Hamas. Barack Obama is a person who retailed the suggestion that opposition to gay marriage was in and of itself bigotry and evil. Barack Obama used the occasion of people being shot in order to promote the agenda of the shooters. And here was Barack Obama's speech with regard to a Ferguson grand jury decision over Michael Brown. I'll never forget this one. Michael Brown was a criminal who robbed a convenience store. And then, when Michael Brown was confronted by a police officer, he reached into the police officer's car, discharged the police officer's gun, tried to run away, and then turned around and charged at the police officer. A series of lies were then told about the police officer. The suggestion was made that he had shot Michael Brown in the back in cold blood. That's where the whole hands up, don't shoot routine came from the political left. It was all a pack of lies. Every single bit of it was a lie. And then, after a grand jury decided not to indict based on actual evidence, the president of the United States got up and said that actually none of it was a lie. People don't just make things up like this while the rioting was happening. But don't worry, he never emboldened extremism, Barack Obama.
What is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up. Separating that from this particular decision, there are issues in which the law too often feels as if it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion.
By the way, like the city was burning at this time. So that's a justification of the rioters. That's what that was. He would say, no, I'm against rioting. I'm against rioting. It's really bad. But the rioters do have a point. You do have to acknowledge their concerns. Here's Barack Obama's speech after the murder. This is actually at a memorial service for slain Dallas police officers who were shot by a Black Lives Matter activist. Here was Barack Obama basically ripping on the officers.
And while some suffer far more under racism's burden, some feel to a far greater extent discrimination's sting. Although most of us do our best to guard against it and teach our children better, none of us is entirely innocent. No institution is entirely immune. And that includes our police departments. We know this.
Just amazing. Just amazing. But don't worry, he never elevated extremism. Again, this is why I say it's not enough to say political violence is bad. We all understand political violence is bad. Okay, or we should. But saying that is the equivalent of just saying violence is bad. It's a childish sentiment. It's a childish but true sentiment, but it doesn't actually do anything. What you actually need to do is call out the permission structures that enable this violence. The permission structures, the ideologies that foment this violence. And if you forward those ideologies while simultaneously claiming to be against political violence, I don't really believe you. I'm sorry, I don't. Well, that's all for now, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Be sure to check out all of the other great content on my channel. I'll see you here next time.